Welcome, Laura Josephson, to Suicide Undone. I'm so pleased to have you here today. I see you as a miracle worker, that you have this wonderful approach to healing. And you are a board certified homeopath. You deal with all sorts of ailments, including depression and other emotional crises. And please tell us a little bit about your background.
Thank you, Linda. I'm really happy to be here with you to talk about this very important topic. First of all, I am a homeopath. I've been in practice for over 30 years. And homeopathy is a system of healing that is holistic in that it looks at the whole person, body, mind, and soul. And so we're really taking into account all the different interconnected symptoms and manifestations of imbalance that a person can have, and taking those into account and finding natural remedies that really correspond to that person's individual need. So anyway, I've been practicing homeopathy for over 30 years. I have a clinic in Nyack, and I'm also the author of a book on homeopathy called A Homeopathic Handbook of Natural Remedies. It was put out by Random House before it was became Penguin Random House, and on Villard Books. And anyway, it's a self-help guide to using homeopathy at home for self-limiting ailments. It's not for chronic or very serious conditions, but it's for colds and flus and sore throats and allergies and all kinds of first aid and things like that. So
now, Laura, how did you get interested in the field?
Yes. So I was studying herbs, and I was always interested in healing as something that human beings need on many different levels. And I was studying herbs, and then I had a friend who had recovered very miraculously from a very difficult childbirth. And she introduced me to homeopathy and told me that that's what she used to recover. And I was so astounded at her incredible recovery that I started reading about homeopathy. And it really just felt like the absolute wonderful right thing for me to be jumping headlong into. So I began my study of homeopathy over about 36 years ago. Yeah.
Well, you definitely sold me. I was totally dumbfounded yesterday. I went to the hospital and I visited a 26-year-old woman who attempted suicide, who had been in a coma. And because of the remedies that you suggested to the mother, she came out of the coma. Now she's still brain damaged, but she's not in the coma anymore. And you are continuing to help the mother and this poor woman with your remedies, which are all natural. It's amazing, totally amazing to me.
Well, thank God that we have these remedies, and it's it's our philosophy in homeopathy that we have in nature. There are substances that were created for us if we just took notice and really got to understand and develop a kind of relationship to living substances, plants, even animal substances, and all kinds of things, that they are here for our healing, that God created them for us for healing. We have a stewardship toward the earth, and all of the, you could say, the dominion over the land in a heartfelt and holistic way. And also the natural world gives us back things for our sustenance, our food, our medicines, building materials. All these things are created for us to live a full and balanced life. So anyway, we have marvelous remedies to help people in this young woman's situation. Hopefully, the topic of discussion here is to help people to avoid winding up in such a dire need and in hospital. So
absolutely. And it's just an example of how a little bit of knowledge can go such a long way, right, in bringing about healing. So I have some case examples that you could give us from your practice of people who have been healed.
Sure. So, as you well know, Linda, there are different reasons why people become suicidal and have suicidal ideation or depression. It can be from, loss of relationships, or of loved ones who've passed on, or financial hardship, and all sorts of other reasons. And so a couple of examples I have, different people of different ages. I treated a man who had what we'd call a reversal of fortune. He lost all his money in the stock market. He had also made some bad investments, and suddenly all of his lifestyle, which had been pretty, what you call, a high consumption kind of a lifestyle, was the bottom fell out, and he felt like he was ashamed that he was a failure to his family, that he was worthless because he had placed all his worth in his financial profile. And so when that fell apart, he felt like he wasn't worth anything. And he felt, again, a failure, worthless, despicable, and he didn't even want to talk to anybody. He became very withdrawn. And so with homeopathic treatment, he received a remedy that is known to really help people who are suicidal, especially from a kind of, financial distress. That remedy is made from gold. It's called aurum metallicum. And it often helps people who feel, again, this feeling of having been at a certain pinnacle or setting a very high standard of living or relationship or idealism of some type, where that all kind of falls apart. And it helps to restore people. It actually is a kind of a bringer of light. As we know, gold is a reflection like the sun, and it has this kind of, high value, right? But gold is a gold standard. And as a homeopathic medicine, when it's prepared in accordance with homeopathic principles as a medicine, it can be restorative and rebalancing and help somebody accept their circumstances without feeling that they are worthless, and restore a sense of value to their life.
That's pretty amazing to me that there are different shades of depression, different types, depending on the source of it. And there's different approaches based on the source.
Yes, and so here I'll give you another example of a boy about 12 years old, and this happened during Sandy. That was a few years back, but his family lost their home, and he had recently adopted a dog, which he was very, very enamored with and in love with, and they had to move in very close quarters with some other family members as a temporary living situation, which became very stressful for the family, for all the parties concerned. And this boy's parents insisted that the dog get adopted out. And they actually didn't even tell the boy that while he was at school, the father went and got rid of the dog, took it to a shelter, I believe. The boy was absolutely devastated. And, he began stammering, and he was crying all the time and was very, very, very distressed and didn't want to live. He just said, my life is over. And so anyway, a dose or two of a remedy called Ignatia amara, which is made from a plant, is really helpful for people who've lost a loved one, or when it's kind of a shocking or new situation. It's not necessarily for prolonged grief, although it can be suitable and helpful for some people in that situation, but it's primarily for something fairly recent, where there's the sense of shock that's very, very, very recent. And so, he hadn't been eating, and his ability to communicate with others around him had been really limited. And after taking Ignatia, his life forces kind of returned to him, and was really back to himself.
So amazing. How long a time did it take for the efficacy of that treatment?
In his case, it was fairly quick because his situation was what we call very acute. He didn't have a long history of depression. It was a fairly short span of about a month or two. And so the healing took place after about a week. And I'll give you a third example, another case that was cured with the same remedy, Ignatia, but a different situation, of a woman who sadly lost her husband on 9/11. And she was, of course, very depressed and distraught, and she wouldn't eat. She refused a lot of comfort and help from other people People were bringing her meals that went unopened. And it was very, very, she just felt like her whole life was over and she didn't want to live. And so the remedy Ignatia also restored her to a sense of balance and helped her to overcome the grief and live with it. And again, these remedies are natural in that they don't suppress feelings. They don't hide them away or push them down. It helps a person to bear their feelings with more flexibility and adaptability and to carry them with more ease. So it doesn't erase problems, but it helps a person to cope with them and realize, I can do this. I can manage with this. My life isn't so miserable. It's not a complete loss or failure. I can carry on. And I can seek counseling. I can I receive help from family. I can get a leg up. I can do this. It may be difficult, but it's doable. So again, homeopathic remedies can help restore a sense of vitality and hope where it wasn't before.
It's another tool in the toolbox. Now, have you seen increased demands in your practice over recent years?
I have. I've seen, especially with COVID and people feeling more isolated, I've encountered more people who have a sense of isolation and depression, anxiety, about, earlier in the pandemic, things like contamination and fear of being near other people and just the sense of life itself was very, very dangerous. And so there's this like pulling inward and withdrawal from social interaction. And so people are actually still recovering from that. It's ongoing. It takes a while to unravel that. And people became more dependent on using the internet for social contact, doing Zoom and Google, videos and so on. And so coming back to real meaningful face-to-face connections is taking some time. And so people are still suffering from a sense of loneliness and isolation. And I know that there are some reports that have come out recently in the mainstream media about how loneliness is an epidemic right now. And
absolutely. And I think especially among adolescents, there seems to be an epidemic of depression and suicides. Do you have any insights into the factors in general that may have contributed to this epidemic at this point in time?
I think there are quite a few that kind of are confluent, that come together. One of them is that, of course, with the pandemic and the isolation, which we just talked about. But I think also the fact that this generation of young people is especially attached to social media and not only using it as a form of communication, which means they're not actually with one another in the same sense, that they're doing a lot of virtual kinds of, social relationships, but also that they're just, they've become accustomed to this and they don't develop the social skills of being, let's say, vulnerable to getting rejection. You go to a dance or a social gathering and you ask someone to dance, or you try and make a new friend, and there's risk, right? And people have become accustomed to this sort of filter, of this safety net of having this, behind the screen kind of thing. And so there's this fear of vulnerability that I think is driving things. I think also we have social issues outside of the influence of social media that are also contributing, which is the sort of loss of family cohesion. A lot of kids growing up in single parent households. There's a lack of sense of structure in terms of rhythm in life, meal times with family, or, getting up at the same hour, going to sleep at the same hour. A lot of kids go to sleep looking at their tablet or their phone, and that's sort of disturbing the sleep cycle. And we also have a loss of religious life or a life of faith where there's a sense of something beyond oneself that's greater, that governs us and is protecting us and looking after us and all that. So I think there are many factors. I've just named a few.
Yeah. And I think particularly a lot of the kids these days, they're addicted to the video games. It does take on an addictive quality, and it just accelerates. And that is at a cost of other things, as you said, the social connections, the more meaningful, qualitative type of activities that they could be engaging in. So do you see an equal amount of anxiety in addition to the depression? Usually are they co-occurring in your practice? What types of things are you seeing?
Yeah, I see a lot of anxiety disorders. Some of them can have a depressive component, and so sometimes they are together, sometimes they're separate. Certainly, both anxiety and depression seem to be at an all-time high in my practice, at least the people that I'm seeing. Even when somebody comes to me, let's say for arthritis, I always ask about the emotional background in their story. Or they come to me for chronic headaches. Well, what's going on emotionally? Because we understand in homeopathy that most physical illnesses are manifestations of non-physical phenomena that have been occurring in the background, right? So let's say somebody has unresolved grief or has a bitter resentment about something that's brewing in them, or anger about something. It could evolve into chronic headaches, right? A lot of people who have headaches have emotions that are suppressed. Not everybody, but many. And so if we delve into the connection between the headaches and the emotions, we can sometimes really resolve it with the correct remedy that's suited just for them.
I have seen some examples, very dramatic examples in the course of my social work career, of how powerful that mind-body connection is. And many years ago, I used to work in a psychiatric community house. One of my coworkers developed inexplicably a very severe rash on both of his hands. He'd been to one dermatologist after another, and no one could figure out what was going on. They gave him ointments, they gave him creams. He was so tormented by this rash, which was also itchy. They used to take a bristle brush and just go over his hands, just desperate to get some relief. And one night, it just kind of dawned on me, and I said, Jeffrey, I think maybe there's some conflict that you have. And I'm sure if you just start talking, maybe we could try to get to the bottom of it. And we did, because after a while, it wasn't just in his hands, it was also on his feet. Now, when you think of a rash, usually you think of something systemic. You eat something, you have an allergic reaction. It was very unusual that it was just on his hands and his feet. So, as I said, we did get to the bottom of it. And what it was is that a few weeks before this happened to him, very unfortunately, there had been a death of one of the residents. She asphyxiated in her sleep, and he was the one that found her. And he was so traumatized, but apparently never really spoke about it. And this is why debriefing is so important. He had such a strong unconscious fear that it would happen again, that he would have to touch the body to see if it was alive or dead, but he really couldn't touch it. He'd have to kick it instead. So you see how his mind just did this whole conversion into physical manifestations. And I've seen other examples of that too. I had a coworker who had a best friend who's had a recent loss, and she felt she had to be strong for her friend and not show grief. But deep inside, she was really so hurting. And then inexplicably, she became paralyzed. She couldn't move her legs, and they couldn't figure out what it was. And then it was a young psychiatric resident. He figured it out because her roommate in the hospital noticed that in her sleep, she was in fact moving her legs. But in the meantime, they were sticking needles in her legs, and she wasn't feeling a blessed thing. So what that conflict was about is that she felt it would be selfish to have people pay attention to her because her friend was grieving the loss of her father. But unconsciously, this was how she kind of diverted the attention to herself. She's paralyzed. People are forced to attend to her. So the mind is very, very powerful. And the same way it could produce disease, it could also bring about healing. And we hear sometimes examples of when people are really determined to get better. I remember coming across a man who was really sick due to AIDS. And he said he got up from the bed, and he said he knew that if he'd gone back in the bed, it would have been a certain death. And he actually willed himself back to health. And when I saw him, you would never imagine that this man was ill to begin with, or certainly that he had reached that point, that he had the idea that if he goes back into bed, that would be the end.
Wow, that's remarkable. Well, our outlook certainly can determine, or at least, strongly drive the direction, course that our health will take, whether it's our mental health, emotional health, or physical health. Our outlook, our attitude about it is hugely important. And it's
the law of attraction. And a lot of times people aren't aware of it, but when they do become aware of it, it could be so transformative. When they are aware of the negative vibes that they put out through their thinking, and when they take active steps to reverse that, it's really amazing what can happen. But it's a question of bringing awareness to it when it's happening, because it's so subtle.
Right. And so to that point, I want to illustrate a little bit more about how homeopathy works, because people listening to this podcast may wonder, well, what's going on here? How does this work, right? And so the way it works is the remedy is selected for the unique constellation of symptoms that person has. And so we're trying to match the remedy that is similar to the person suffering. So the word homeopathic means similar suffering. And we use similars rather than opposites for healing. Like, we don't use antidepressants, antifungals, antibiotics. We use things that actually, in some sense, mirror the imbalance. It's like holding up a mirror, you could say, and we're using a very minute amount of a substance that if we had given it in its full, undiluted form, would produce these symptoms in a healthy person. So what we're trying to do is stimulate the person's natural healing ability. We understand that everybody has this inner physician, which is, in some sense, you could call it the grace of God, or the ability to heal. Like, if you cut your finger, you wouldn't have to will it or think about it in order for the blood to coagulate and the scab to form and new skin to come and grow and fill in and so on. This is your body already knowing how to do this. This is the inner physician. And just like with a physical cut, with an emotional crisis, with suicidal depression, with an anxiety disorder, we have this inner physician that, if it just gets the right kind of nudge, can help to put things back into balance. And that's how homeopathy works, is we're showing a kind of mirroring with a natural substance that reminds the human organism how to rebalance itself and get back into harmony. So I hope that gives a little bit of an insight how it works.
Yeah, definitely. Are there any recommendations you could make for overall well-being, physical health? Of course, a sick person is not going to feel their best, and it could lead to depression. But So health is really at the core of what we're talking about. Are there any recommendations, or is there any regimen that you might be able to recommend to the audience?
Sure. Well, insofar as it relates to mental health and emotional well-being and the subject of suicidal depression, recognizing that this feeling, this unbearable feeling, is temporary, even if it seems like it's going on. It doesn't have to be forever, and it doesn't have to be the end. And so, being gentle with oneself and reminding oneself that one can care for oneself, and that if you believe in a higher power, that God loves you and wants you to live and has given you this precious life, and that you have a reason for being, even if you're not sure exactly what that is. We're all kind of figuring it out as we go, aren't we? Right? And so, first of all, to recognize that you're worthy of self-care and that you're a beloved child of God in whatever religious tradition or spiritual kind of orientation that one has, that we have a higher power that created us, gave us this precious life, and that there's something we're meant to be doing with it. And even if we don't know what it is right now, don't despair. We're worthy of care. And the more we care for ourselves and the more we receive the love from our Creator, we're able to find healing. And even just with that orientation, it can spark all kinds of wonderful things, as you say, through the law of attraction, that goodness comes to us. The help or the phone call from a friend that we haven't heard from can come. A job opportunity, a healed relationship, all kinds of things can happen. So self-care, so that means feeding oneself in a healthy manner, eating healthy food in a balanced way, getting a good quality sleep, having a sleep schedule where you go to bed at approximately the same time every night and you wake up at the same time every morning. A rhythm for your day, the time that you eat, that you sleep. Limit the amount of exposure to screens. This actually saps your life force. It's, we're dependent on using screens, unfortunately, every day of our lives, it seems. But the ways that you can limit it and spend some time outdoors. Let your gaze go way out into the distance. Go take a walk where there's a landscape where you can look far into the distance. Everything in our lives seems way too close up. We need a little more perspective. So a change of scenery, being more expansive with the way that you receive and participate in nature. These are all like really basic things, but it's good to be reminded of them, to participate in nature, to eat healthy, to have a good quality sleep.
I so agree. And in our busy lives, it's so easy to forget about those things. And what I tell people is get out a calendar and structure those things into your routine. A nature walk or something out of the blue, even something spontaneous that you do that's fun. I don't think we're intended to be like machines and function and overwork. And unfortunately, this American society is all about that. It's all about productivity, and so in contrast to the European lifestyle, where you incorporate the social outings, and it's not all just about work.
Right.
People drive themselves way too hard.
Right. And so another point that I want to add to what we talked about earlier about different causes is I think that, we are in as we call it, a consumer society, where we think that everything has to come to us, or that we need to get certain things. And part of the human economy, in the healthiest sense of what it is to be human, is not only to get, but also to give, not only to receive, but to give. And so one of the best bits of advice or counseling that I can give to somebody who feels really depressed and involved in their own negative feelings is to actually do something of service, to volunteer, to do something for another human being without any hope of getting compensated. That we're actually, human beings are meant to have some aspects of one's life that are purely service. If it just means you open the door for somebody without expecting them to say thank you, or carrying somebody's groceries, or whatever it is, but finding ways to be of service. If you see somebody having a hardship, offer them a hand, or volunteer at an animal shelter, or at a nursing home, or something that takes you out of your own misery and puts yourself in the shoes of someone else who's actually more needy than you.
Yeah, and I'd like to elaborate on that connection with animals because it's so important. I remember speaking with a man one time whose son unfortunately committed suicide, and it was his only son, and he was in the depths of grief. And so I recommended to him to go to the SPCA and connect with the Golden Outreach Program, where you take the animal to the shelters and to the schools. And when you see the faces light up in other people, that can have such a therapeutic impact.
It's so healing to bring a smile or a laugh to someone else's face. You think, wow, what I just did or said or whatever, my presence here made someone smile or laugh. It's so incredibly healing. Yeah.
And when I recommended for him to think about a possible pet adoption, he put up automatic resistance and he said, no, I couldn't possibly. I have such a busy life, I would never have time. But when he did go, in fact, to the SPCA, he locked eyes with a dog, and it was love at first sight. The next day, he came back and he adopted him. And if I tell you, that dog literally saved him, because the bond and the connection that formed, it was such a direct path to his healing and recovery over this very tragic event that happened.
And it's a story I have seen and heard over and over again, that when somebody so-called gets a rescue dog, it's the dog that's rescuing the person, you know?
Exactly. They become members of the family.
Yeah. And so, you know, especially, I mean, cats and the other animals can certainly bring something very similar. There's something about dogs and the way that they give such unconditional love and devotion to their master. It's so beautiful. And, you know, in some ways, the love of an animal is more perfect than humans. You know, they probably fail less at loving than humans do. So anyway, yes, relationships with animals can be remarkably healing.
Yeah. And I want to address this issue also, Western medicine's over-reliance on medication. I was speaking with a woman whose husband had gotten cancer. And through some knowledge that she was able to get, she found out that if he increased his consumption of salmon, it was really going to help his blood. Now, the oncologist never said this to him, but in fact, he started eating salmon 3 times a week, to the point that the oncologist was totally dumbfounded of the improvement that happens. And you see this over and over and over again with doctors. There's such an over-reliance on the pills and not so much on the foods that could actually bring about healing.
It's unfortunate that I think up until very recently, most medical schools don't really teach nutrition at all. And so not only for the prevention of disease, but even in treatment to reverse conditions. I've worked with people who are, dealing with cancer. And so we talk a lot about diet, and there are therapeutic diets that are not meant for everyday use, but when one is actively, fighting cancer, that are absolutely appropriate. And, salmon has a lot of benefits. There are lots of other things one can do. There's a whole world of using mushrooms. The fungi are incredibly helpful for the immune system, for different aspects of one's being, for fighting viral illness, for fighting cancer cells, for balancing and improving circulation of the blood to the brain and helping brain cells and all that. So there's a whole world of not only herbs and supplements and oils, but also the fungi, and of course homeopathy, which is a certain branch of medicine, of healing, that encompasses all those things. We use plants, minerals, animals, fungi, lots of different things in homeopathy. And so all of those are in our tool chest. Yeah.
I love to tell the story. Many years ago, a correction officer in the jail where I work came to me, and he was so stressed, so stressed. And as it turned out, he had precancerous colon polyps. And he was beside himself because he had a family history of colon cancer. And he told me, I just don't know what to do anymore, because I go to the doctor, they cut them off, and 3 months later they grow back.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm certainly not an expert, but what I advised him was increase your consumption of antioxidants, and in particular pomegranate juice, because that is a very powerful antioxidant. Well, this man was so stressed out, he started drinking 2 cups a day, and apparently there's a pill of concentrated pomegranate. So he started doing that. And after a while, I hadn't seen him in a while, but when I did go into him, I asked him, how's it going? He said, you wouldn't believe it. They went away. Laura, it's been 13 years.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Recurrence. That is a miracle. Absolute miracle in my eyes.
Yeah, there's an old saying that we dig our grave with our knife and our fork. And so, what we put in really matters. What comes out actually really matters. What we say, our outlook, our attitude also really matters. It all matters. And so not just the foodstuffs and the substances of what we eat, but the energetics of what we eat. And so nowadays, a lot of food is very different than it was 30 or 40 years ago. The way that wheat is produced, most of it contains a lot of residue from glyphosate, which is the common weed killer Roundup. There are all kinds of different agricultural practices, both in the grain and produce industry, and also meat production, that really devalues the quality of our foodstuffs. Has not only reduced in terms of the nutritional components, but also contains a lot more residues of pesticides. And most people know this already. And you have to become, really knowledgeable and read labels carefully and know your sources if you really want to step up your game in terms of nutrition. But most conventionally grown produce is grown in soil that's really devalued. So, what we thought was all the iron that's in spinach, if you're buying commercial spinach, you're not getting much iron at all, right? And so, we often find ourselves needing to take supplements, or winding up having, pathology that develops because we have a chronic, low level of certain nutrients that we really need. So, thinking about food and taking it very seriously is something that modern human beings, unfortunately, need to become more proactive about. But that's the case.
And these days, the amount of pesticides that they put in food, if we only knew. Well, I was like everyone else. I go to the supermarket and get sticker shock whenever I saw the organic food. But I came across a story. I don't know if it's true, but it was in a newsletter of one of the people that is, dealing with health matters. And he was talking about a conversation he had with a farmer. The farmers typically use fox urine to repel the animals from coming and eating their crops. And what he recounted, this farmer, is that one day he ran out of the fox urine and he used his own urine, and it killed his crops. And he claimed it was because of the pesticides that he himself was consuming. I don't know if this story is true, but it certainly made an impact on me. And I did change to organic. But particularly, I think the poorest foods, if you're eating berries, if you're eating potatoes, those type of foods have greater capacity to absorb pesticides. Isn't that right?
Yes. I mean, there's there's some literature that describes in detail, like the Environmental Working Group produces this thing called the Dirty Dozen, which is the 12 most pesticide-laden foods each year. It varies because there are different types of pests that tend to, be attracted to, let's say, potatoes, or, and so they do more, not only pesticides, but genetic modification. Like virtually all commercially grown non-organic potatoes are genetically modified, and they have a lot of pesticide residue. So every year there's a group of the Dirty Dozen. I think now blueberries made it to near the top of that Dirty Dozen list this year, and it wasn't on it last year. So it does change, and it's good to be, aware of these things. Certainly, getting a good vegetable wash for your produce, washing it properly, or you can just use vinegar and water, and you just soak it for a while and then rinse it, and that's, you're good to go. So cleaning your food is really important. No longer will I, eat the strawberries out of the box on the way home from the grocery store. You really got to wash everything like really well. And unless you, buy at farmers markets, or you have local places that you have relationships with farmers or people that make deliveries, there are all kinds of buying clubs. People work with different farms that make deliveries of organic or at least naturally raised things. And, just a word about organic, it doesn't always guarantee the best quality. You could get organic broccoli that was shipped from California and has been sitting in a container truck for almost a week, in a refrigerated truck. It's not going to be as healthy for you as if you buy fresh broccoli from a farmer nearby that is using minimal or no pesticides. So if you have farm people or a farmer's market that you can develop a relationship with, that's even better, because to certify organic is actually quite expensive, and farmers are almost always, on a very, very hairline kind of a budget, and to spend the extra to become certified organic is a huge hurdle. And yet their products are minimally or no pesticides, and they're offering a superior product than some commercially sanctioned, commercially available organic products.
Or maybe even take up a new hobby, which is gardening, grow it yourself.
I think it's great. I think that, the idea of like a victory garden, which was like the thing after World War II. Yes. I think that part of the healing of our human organism, you could say, and also of the earth, has to do with more of an intimate relationship with our foodstuffs, which means just growing a little bit of something. If everybody had a small patch where they even just grew a few things, even some herbs and things like parsley and rosemary and basil or thyme, and then let's say a few easy to grow crops, garlic and bell peppers and beans and carrots, radishes, there stuff like that. People had a small pot, or you can even grow tomatoes in a terracotta pot, as long as you don't have deer coming around nibbling on them. So just having some sense of responsibility toward your food, and it's also a real pleasure to see things grow and to reap the benefits. There was a time in my life where I had a fair amount of land to have a nice sized garden, and my goodness, the number of zucchinis I had were so prolific that I was dropping them in people's mailboxes. I had more than I knew what to do with. So it's wonderful to have the sense of abundance of things you've grown.
Yeah.
And
one of my former clients, who is a cancer survivor, she had it down pat in terms of everything was so homegrown, and she would freeze it and she'd have it available all year round. And she's the one that taught me that, which I never knew. We learn new things every day, and tell me your opinion, please. But she said that drinking from plastic bottles is estrogenic.
It can be a hormone disruptor, and most plastics, there are some that are especially made plastics that leach less of the plastic material into the water. But most commercial water bottles, the whole idea of buying water bottles, most of the quality of the water is not so great anyway. So it's better to, outfit your home environment with a good quality water filter. find some system that's going to work for you depending on your source. Most people have municipal water, there's well water and so forth. But anyway, yes, plastic can leach into water bottles, especially if the bottles have become overheated or if they've been frozen and then thawed. So some people say, oh, I keep, water bottles in my freezer and then I put it in my car so that I have water to drink as it thaws out. Not a good idea. You should use stainless steel or glass as a water container. Yes, it's heavier, but it's much, much healthier. So I avoid consuming things from plastic bottles. And even if you buy organic produce that's been shrink wrapped in plastic, wash it thoroughly because there is plastic residue on your produce if it's been shrink wrapped. So yeah, we have way too much plastic in the environment.
So true, so true. Well, Laura, you are a wealth of knowledge.
Well,
please tell the audience how they could get in touch with you if they need consultation.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Do we have time for me to give one more little help?
Of course, yes.
So
yes.
If you want to preserve food and have it year round that's really healthy, go to a farm or a farmer's market, buy a bushel of something like little baby pickles or cucumbers to make pickles at home, or ferment vegetables. It's really easy to do home fermentation, and it's very satisfying to have homemade pickles and sauerkraut and other vegetables. You can make homemade tomato sauce, but fermenting using a natural ferment, not vinegar, but salt and water, the proper way that develops a natural flora, a whole bunch of microbes that are super healthy for the gut. Really, really great to have year round. And so you can have a pantry, if you have room, pantry full of pickles. What do they call it? Muffalata, which is like cauliflower and carrots and a bunch of other vegetables pickled. Anyway, pickling is a lot of fun and super good for your health. Anyway, so there's my tip about doing things year round. I tend to put up fruits for the rest of the year. I like to buy bushels of peaches. I skin them and I cook them and I make a compote, and then I have them year round, and it's wonderful.
That's wonderful.
That sunshine.
I wanted to ask you about probiotics. What can you tell us about those? Are those healthy to consume?
Many probiotics that you get in pill form are, well, better than nothing, but not as great as having live fermented food products. So they can have a therapeutic use if they're used properly, depending on if you have some type of pathology, a gut health issue or leaky gut syndrome. But simply consuming good quality and diverse probiotics through naturally fermented foods, I think, is preferable. There's also kefir, which is far better than yogurt as far as the amount of live cultures in there. It's almost completely lactose-free for people who are lactose sensitive or intolerant. Kefir is a drink that's similar to yogurt, but it's much more active in a diverse number of live cultures than commercially available yogurt. So that can be a wonderful addition to your health routine. And I think probiotics would be another subject for another time, but my best advice is to consume them through foodstuffs like kimchi, which is a Korean type of spicy sauerkraut, in a sense, and other types of fermented vegetables. Yeah.
Any last thoughts?
Wishing everybody marvelous health, and look after yourself and your loved ones. There are lots of forces working against us to try and get us to buy things that are convenient, cheap, and not healthy in terms of food. Take that little bit of extra time to cook slow at home. Don't use your microwave. Slow cooking is a whole movement that started, 20 years ago, to return us to like the quality of flavors and foodstuffs that develop a marvelous flavor and nutritional value. And of course, that invisible ingredient, the love that we put into something, the care, the creativity that we put into something that nourishes our soul and those around us that we feed. So, think about those things. Cooking is marvelously creative. Other creative activities are really important for balanced, good health. Painting, making music, sculpture, you know, whatever it is that floats your boat that is creative. Everybody has an artist in them of some type. To varying degrees, we have different gifts and skills or inclinations. Being creative is an important part of being healthy. So there you go.
Trying new things, you never know what talents are unleashed.
That's right. Take a class like, you know, take a drawing class or a sculpture class or a basket weaving, whatever it is that you like, or join a hiking group. There are lots of different social groups for, you know, ways to become more social that involve learning something new. So you're doing two things at once. You're being social and you're learning something new at the same time. So there's a good piece of advice for staying healthy.
Okay. So how can people reach you?
So you can reach me by email. My email address is, I have several, but the easiest one to remember is my name, Laura, Laura, Josephson, Josephson, @gmail.com. So that's my email address. I have a website for my homeopathic practice, and that's just laurajosephson.com, or it's also nyackhomeopathy.com. And that's NYACKHOMEOPATHY.com. My office is in Nyack. My homeopathic practice is in Nyack. I also see people on Zoom and FaceTime as well, but mostly face-to-face in my clinic. And you can also call me on the phone. My number is 845-558-8559. There you go.
Laura, thank you so much. Can't thank you enough for this marvelous talk.
It's been a pleasure, Linda.
I want to remind everyone, if you are experiencing any suicidal thoughts, please reach out to someone. Help is always available. And please subscribe to this channel. We have some wonderful guest speakers lined up, and I would love for everyone to be able to benefit from that. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda, for your great work. Keep it up.
Thanks.